In today's video, I'm going to be surviving another 100 days in Minecraft's hardest mode. Will I be able to survive? Make sure to keep watching to find out. Before we get into the video, I would like to say that only 4% of the people watching my videos are actually subscribed, so if you do go on to enjoy the video, consider subscribing. It's completely free, and you can always unsubscribe if you don't enjoy the video. If this video gets 10,000 likes, I will survive 400 days. Now that we have all the annoying stuff out of the way, let's get straight into the hopefully less annoying 300 days. The first thing that I did after returning to the world was refamiliarize myself with Snowville and say hi to the villagers, iron golems, and of course, my dog and cat. Once I was finished with saying hello to everyone, I immediately got down to business. The first thing on my list of things to do was go end raiding. After adding unbreaking and mending to my spare pair of elytra, I bought some food from the butcher and then spent the rest of the night killing creepers for gunpowder. After collecting the iron from my iron farm, I set off to the end and began raiding. Using my elytra, I was able to cover ground a lot more quickly than on foot, and I didn't have to worry about bridging over the void or looking at endermen. While flying, I came across this huge cluster of end islands that looked a little bit like a group of ants traveling through space. Did that make any sense? After traveling for a bit longer, I found my first city. The main goal of this trip was to get shulker shells, so I made sure to hunt down as many shulkers as I could and killed them with my looting sword for extra drops. Before leaving, I also made sure to grab the elytra, as you can really never have enough of them. It seemed like my luck was pretty good because I found another city almost immediately after the first one. This one was a bit smaller than the first city, but it still had a chest room and a boat, so I wasn't about to complain. Once I was finished raiding the city, I took a look around and lo and behold, there was a third city. I was originally only going to try and find 2 cities, but I obviously wasn't going to turn down some free loot, so I flew over to the next city and started pillaging. While looting, I also collected some of the ender rods which I could use for future builds. 3 cities was good enough for me, so after clearing the final one, I found the nearest end gateway and headed back home. Now that I had a good amount of extra shulker boxes, I spent some time organizing my ender chest. Once that was done, I took the banners I had looted from my adventures and hung them in the throne room. It was time. I had spent over 200 days manually hunting creepers for gunpowder, and at this point, it would just be silly to not build a creeper farm. Before I could start building, I needed to collect some resources. Almost all of the stone that I had previously mined had been used building the castle in the last video, and I didn't feel like mining in the quarry, so I decided to start a beacon mine. The next 3 days were spent deep underground at Y12, mining for stone and valuable resources. Even though mining in the quarry might have been better for collecting stone, I personally preferred beacon mining as I was able to just mindlessly swing my pickaxe around instead of having to stay within a certain area. There was also the benefit of getting a bunch of diamonds, redstone, and lapis, which were always a great surprise to come across. From days 209 to 210, I continued gathering materials for the creeper farm. One of the main things that I needed to build the farm was trapdoors, which are surprisingly expensive to craft. Like seriously, how does this turn into this? This meant that I had to spend a whole day and a half just to get enough wood to make the farm. To start day 211, I visited the Enderman farm and repaired all of my tools. Once that was done, I began work on the creeper farm. The farm design that I'm using is by a YouTuber named Mysticat. If you are looking to build this farm for yourself, I would recommend watching until the end of the video, as I do make some changes later on. If you haven't noticed already, I've been trying to make very efficient farms throughout this series, as I don't really like AFKing. By spending a bit of extra time building a more efficient farm, I'm able to reduce the amount of time I spend mindlessly waiting around, which is always a good thing. However, this also means that I have to spend more time placing trapdoors, which is definitely not a good thing. After 6 days of hard work, I finally finished the farm. I needed to take a little bit of a break after all of the building, so I spent the rest of the day and night AFKing to see what kind of rates the farm would produce. When I went to check the farm the next day, there was a huge buildup of creepers and spiders in the kill chamber, so I spent a few minutes clearing out all of the mobs with my bow. During this short AFK session, I had accumulated a good amount of gunpowder and string. I decided to spend the next 2 days AFKing as I didn't want to have to come back for a while. The creeper farm had worked successfully throughout the 2 days, and when I went to check the results, I was pleasantly surprised. There wasn't a huge amount of gunpowder, but it would be enough to last me for at least half of the 100 days. With my newly acquired gunpowder and stockpiled sugarcane, I crafted a bunch of fireworks. I now had a source of gunpowder in the world, but if I wanted to have infinite fireworks, I still needed the other half of the recipe: paper. Although I had already built a sugarcane farm in the previous 100 days, it was not close enough to the base to be loaded and therefore didn't produce at all. The solution to this problem was to rebuild the farm closer to the village, so I spent the rest of the day taking it down. Rebuilding the farm took longer than expected, but I managed to finish by noon on day 222 and spent the rest of the day trading with the villagers and crafting the iron from the iron farm into blocks. The roses from the iron farm were starting to clog up the system, which meant that it was time to expand the Iron Golem Memorial. After taking a look at the target dummies next to the pillager watchtower, I had an idea to add a iron golem to the middle of the memorial. Not a real iron golem, of course, just the blocks to build one. I'm not that harsh. On day 224, I worked on the village paths, as there had been a few new builds added since the last expansion. While building the paths, I ran out of coral blocks, so I headed to the nearby coral reef and gathered some more. We are now a quarter of the way through the video, which means it's time to name our first 2 villagers. For the first villager, we have Gamer Donut, and the second villager is going to be named Penguin Master. If you want to have one of these villagers named after you in the next 100 days video, make sure to write a comment with #villager in it. With the naming out of the way, I spent the rest of the day reconnecting the villagers to their workstations, as a lot of them had gotten unlinked at some point and were just wandering aimlessly around the village. During these next 4 days, I went on a wither skeleton hunting adventure. My 2 main goals during this trip were to find a Soul Sand Valley nether fortress, which would be good for a wither skeleton farm, and to get a bunch of wither skeleton skulls. 9 to be exact. After unsuccessfully searching for a suitable nether fortress, I decided to spend some time hunting at one of the fortresses I had originally found in a basalt delta. This was working pretty well at first, but the longer I stayed in the area, the more magma cubes spawned, which meant that there was less wither skeletons, which meant less chances of getting skulls, and that was obviously not a good thing. On day 228, I went on another adventure to find a better nether fortress. Surprisingly, I actually managed to find a good fortress this time. It wasn't perfect by any means, but was more than good enough for wither skeleton hunting now, and potentially a farm in the future. For the rest of day 228, and the majority of day 229, I hunted wither skeletons. During this time, I managed to get 9 wither skeleton skulls. Hopefully, you can see now why I spent so much time searching for this kind of fortress. After returning home and depositing my loot, I immediately hopped straight back into the nether and traveled to the Enderman grinder. When I got to the farm, I made a few improvements so that it would be better for long enchanting and grinding sessions. Speaking of enchanting, I needed to enchant a new sword. Although I already had a perfect sharpness sword, I wanted a different one with smite, which I would be using for something very soon. I finished enchanting the smite sword on day 231, and let me tell you, it is an absolute beast. The rest of the day was spent making preparations for the first major challenge of the video, a triple wither fight. This was not going to be easy. As I prepared to summon the withers, I felt extremely nervous. More nervous than I had ever been in this series. I was more than geared enough for the fight, but I knew that if I made one mistake, the whole series could be over. After sitting in front of the 3 unfinished withers for a solid minute, I finally drank my potions and began the fight. Halfway into fighting the wither, I realized that I had forgotten to grab my smite sword from my shulker box. Luckily, I had some strength 2 potions, which brought my damage levels up quite a bit, and I was able to finish off the wither fairly quickly. Both the remaining withers were still in the exact same spot as I had left them, so I shot another to aggro it, and then repeated the process that I had used to fight the first wither. I'm not sure what was happening in the second fight, but my bow shots were just not hitting the wither, and I actually had to use some of my potions to keep my health at a reasonable level. However, once the wither entered its second stage, it was over for it. My smite sword, coupled with strength 2, made quick work of it, and after reapplying my potion effects, I was ready to fight the final wither. For the final wither fight, I decided to go a little bit more risky and just jumped down with the wither and started swinging. Unfortunately, as soon as I hit the wither, it immediately flew into the air and I was forced to use my normal strategy. Other than this, the fight went fairly smoothly, and it wasn't long before I was able to drink some milk and admire my 3 new shiny nether stars. After returning to the village, I crafted 3 new beacons. The first of the 3 was placed in the quarry so that I would always have haste too. The other 2 were added to the beacon pyramid in the village so that I was able to get jump boost, speed, haste, and regeneration all at the same time. I wanted to relax a little bit after the fight, so I decided to go exploring for a swamp and gather some slime balls for redstone. While flying, I came across a ruined portal, which had an enchanted golden apple in it. The coordinates are -1612, -4095, if you want to find it for yourself. Shortly after leaving the ruined portal, I found a swamp. It wasn't night quite yet, so I spent some time chopping trees and collecting blue orchids to pass the time. During the night, I managed to get almost 4 stacks of slime balls, which should be enough to last me for quite a while. On days 234 and 235, I worked on building a piston door to get into the castle. I'm not that good at redstone, so this took quite a while. I didn't have enough resources to make the full door open, so I decided to go with a secret door instead. The result wasn't perfect, but considering my lack of redstone expertise, I'm still pretty proud of myself. My brain was still in a redstone building mood after the door, so I decided to keep going and started working on an elevator that would go beneath the throne. The project was obviously quite a bit more advanced than the door, which meant that I needed to do a little bit of creative testing beforehand. After doing a bunch of testing and research, I ended up settling on a slime block elevator designed by Woolly Creeper, which will be in the description. Now, all I had to do was build it in the hardcore world. It took a while, but after 3 days of tedious work, I finished the elevator, and let me tell you, it is super fun to use. Although having a slime block elevator is nice and all, it's not really that useful unless you have somewhere for it to go. Luckily for me, I already knew what I was going to put down there: a storage room. With the power of haste 2, I was able to clear out an area super fast, which meant it was time to start planning the build. This was going to be my most used build of the entire series, and I wanted it to look good, so I made sure to do quite a bit more planning than I normally do. While building, I heard a crack of lightning outside. I immediately stopped building, grabbed my channeling trident, and then headed to the nearest plains biome. When I got there, I found the nearest creeper and struck it with the trident. Lightning suddenly surrounded the creature and transformed it into its charged variant. Taking care not to explode the creeper prematurely, I led it towards the nearest mob and then let it go boom. In the hole created by the creeper, there is nothing left over other than the skull of the mob it had blown up. After repeating the process a few more times, I managed to get all 3 of the different mob heads. Obviously, I had to display them, so I headed back home and placed them at the entrance to the throne room. During these next 8 days, I worked on building the storage room. I wanted the theme of the build to be the same as the castle, so the different variants of stone were my main building blocks. My plan for the build was to make different chest units that would each have a different item theme to them. This would make item organization a lot easier later on. I didn't really know what to put in the back of the room yet, so I ended up just making a bulk storage area for all of the resources that I had a lot of. The hardest part of the build was the roof, as I didn't want to make it super flat or plain. I ended up creating 6 different sections and then built a mini dome out of dark oak wood in each of them. I don't know if there was a better way of building upside down, but if anyone knows, please leave a comment down below, as any tips to make this a bit easier would be greatly appreciated. I've built a lot of different things during the series, but I have to say that this build is my favorite, and that's even without the chests. Making the storage room had worn down my tools quite a bit, so I spent the day repairing them at the Enderman grinder. To start off the day, I checked the sugarcane farm. I was pleasantly surprised to see 2.5 stacks in the chest. It wasn't a lot of sugarcane, but just the fact that the farm was working made me really happy. After checking the farm, I traveled to the nearby mega taiga and spent the rest of the day gathering wood for the storage room chests. Once I had enough logs, I headed back to the village and started crafting some chests. I wanted to say something cool here, but to be honest, chest placing just isn't very interesting. We are now half of the way through this video, which means it is time to do some more villager naming. For the first villager, we have Atomic. And for the second one, we have Kara Turtle Sky. I also decided to name my cat in the 2 Endermen now. For the cat, we have Cleocatra. And for the 2 Endermen, we have like and subscribe. I'm sorry, I couldn't help myself. Originally, I thought that once the storage room was finished, I wouldn't have to put too much more work into it. I was wrong. It ended up taking me 4 days to organize the chest sections and move the actual items to the storage room. Was it worth it? Definitely. Would I want to do it again? I mean, it wasn't too no. Over the past few days, I noticed that some of the iron golems were starting to look a little bit worse for wear. This obviously couldn't stand, so I took some of my iron and went on a repairing spree. The marketplace looked nice, but didn't really serve any function yet, so I added a workstation to each stand in the hopes that some of the unemployed villagers would get jobs. While I was working, a wandering trader spawned, so I killed it and took its llamas. I don't know why, but the llamas started spitting on me, and some of it even hit one of the nearby iron golems. Let's just say that after that, the llamas weren't spitting on me much longer. One of the main things in the village that needed a transformation was the nether portal, as it hadn't changed at all since the first 100 days. The first step to this build was getting a bunch of obsidian, which means that one of the end pillars had to become a little bit shorter. I didn't want the nether portal in the village to be super fancy, as the main focus was supposed to be on the castle. However, I do definitely plan on making a super big, elaborate nether portal at some point in this series. After grabbing a few blocks from the storage room, I tried to use the elevator, but it seemed to be broken. To fix this, I changed the elevator so that it would push a minecart with the player in it instead of just a player. For some reason, this makes the elevator work more consistently. Don't ask me why, it just does. Day 257 was spent finishing the nether portal build. The creative part of my brain seemed to be taking a break after the storage room, so I decided to get some inspiration from a nether portal made by Gold Robin, which I think looks super cool. The finished result wasn't super complicated, but I'm still pretty proud of how it turned out. When moving my items to the new storage room, I forgot to transfer the stuff from my bulk storage area, and while I was debating on keeping them in the secret room that they were in currently, I ended up moving them over for convenience. The next build in this video is going to be a bakery, but before I could build it, I needed to get more wood. This was pretty much how I spent my entire day, chopping dark oak trees and fortuning dark oak leaves. Really interesting, right? To start off the day, I chopped some spruce trees so that I could get a bunch of spruce wood. With all the materials gathered, I began making a plan for the bakery in the area next to the marketplace. Over the next few days, I worked on building the bakery. My plan was to have the bottom floor of the build be a small cafe where the villagers could get breakfast and baked goods. I also wanted to have a window where the bakery could serve food like a takeout restaurant. I think that overall the build turned out pretty good in the end and had enough uniqueness to help it stand out among the other village builds. However, I felt like it was missing something, so if you have any suggestions for the build, make sure to leave them in the comments below. After all the building I had done recently, I wanted to take a break and do some advancement hunting. The first advancement that I decided to go for was the bullseye challenge, where you have to hit the bullseye on a target from over 30 blocks away. You would think that this would be fairly easy, but trust me, it definitely wasn't. Because I decided to do the challenge in the village, villagers and iron golems were constantly getting in the way, which slowed down the process quite a bit. Another issue was the flame enchantment on my bow. I would periodically have to go over to the target and extinguish the arrows as there was so much fire on it that I literally couldn't see a thing. Despite these challenges, I still managed to eventually hit the bullseye, which I have to say is probably the peak of my Minecraft career. The second advancement on my list was the one for killing every type of hostile mob. I had currently killed 30 of the 34 different mobs. The ones that I still needed were the silverfish, zoglin, husk, and cave spider. However, I didn't know that at the time. After throwing ender pearls until I spawned an endermite and killed it, only to realize that it didn't even count as a hostile mob, I traveled to the stronghold for a silverfish. At first, silverfish didn't seem to be spawning when I broke the infested blocks. Apparently, if you break an infested block with Silk Touch, it doesn't spawn a silverfish, which is pretty cool. Once I figured this out, it didn't take too long for me to kill a silverfish, and just like that, I only needed 3 more mobs. Killing the zoglin was fairly simple. All I had to do was trap a hoglin in the nether, and then build a nether portal for it to go through. After that, it was just a game of stay away from the hoglin until it turns into a zoglin, and then kill the zoglin. For some reason, I thought that the polar bear was one of the hostile mobs on the list, so I traveled to the nearby iceberg and killed one. When I realized that it actually wasn't, I may or may not have shot myself in the face with an arrow. Luckily, there was one mob that I knew was on the list, a husk, so I headed to the closest desert and killed one, bringing the count up to 33 out of 34. This was when I realized that the final mob that I needed was a cave spider, which is kind of funny as you wouldn't really think of them as a super rare mob. I was still determined to get this advancement, so I grabbed some torches and headed into the mines to look for a mine shaft. Unfortunately, I didn't manage to find any mine shafts during this trip, but I did find a few diamonds and a second zombie spawner, which is pretty cool. Comment down below if you remember the first zombie spawner. Although I hadn't managed to find a mine shaft in the caves, I still had one more ace up my sleeve: mesa biomes. If you didn't know, mesas are the only biomes where mineshafts can actually spawn on the surface, which makes them super good for cave spider hunting. After stocking up on rockets and food, I set off on my mesa finding adventure. While flying, I came across the first mushroom biome of the world. Before continuing on my trip, I made sure to take the coordinates as I wanted to build on a mushroom island at some point. I also found a village that had a beehive next to it. I tried to get the beehive, but I accidentally broke it with my axe, which didn't have silk touch, and had to run away when all the angry bees came flying out. The search for the mesa was going fairly smoothly until my wings suddenly broke and I dropped out of the sky. Luckily, I had a spare pair of elytra in my chest and I was able to keep exploring. Let's just say that I kept a closer eye on the durability of my wings this time. At one point, I also found this super small shattered savanna biome, which I thought looked really cool. I still hadn't found a mesa and my elytra was starting to run a bit low on durability, so I decided to head back home. On the return trip, I managed to find a double witch hut, which is super rare, and another mushroom biome that was much closer to the base. I also almost died while flying, which would have been a pretty embarrassing end to the video. When I returned to the village, the first thing that I did was take a visit to the Enderman grinder for the day and repair all of my tools. So far, the only decorative building that I have done in this world has been in the overworld. It was time for that to change. That's right, it's Nether Hub time. My plan was to make biome spheres for each of the different portals and then connect them up with ice tunnels. I didn't want to spend too much time working on the project right now, so I didn't build spheres for all of the portals yet, just my home one. The village was in a snow biome, which means that the portal sphere, I think that's what I'm going to call them, was going to be themed after a snow biome. The only problem with this is that it's in the nether, and snow melts in the nether. Luckily, the actual snow blocks don't melt, but it's still a bummer that I can't use the snow layers. Overall, I think this portal sphere turned out pretty well, and building it had helped me get past my mental barrier of building in the Nether Hub. Day 275 has arrived, and you know what that means. Naming time. The first villager is going to be named Stuck in Space, and our second villager is going to be called Llama. After naming the villagers, I spent some time filling in the roofs of the towers in the village. It's a small detail, but I think it makes a huge difference in how finished the builds look. These next 2 days were spent planting roses in the Iron Golem Memorial. It's a very tedious job, but one that I'm willing to do to honor the fallen Iron Golems. My right hand was really sore after all of the poppy placing, so I took a small break and spent some time AFKing at the creeper farm. The only problem with this was that for the first day of AFKing, I forgot to restart the redstone clock that controlled the flushing mechanism, which meant that I got a grand total of 0 gunpowder. When I realized this, I immediately restarted the clock and then flew back up to the AFK platform for another day of waiting. This might not seem like a big deal, and to be honest, it really isn't. I just don't like AFKing in this series, and the fact that I had just spent a whole day pointlessly waiting around frustrated me quite a bit. After collecting the gunpowder from the AFK session, I headed to the desert and spent the day mining a bunch of sand. I'm pretty sure you know what's next. Creeper farm upgrades. This meant changing the redstone clock out for an etho hopper clock and adding walls to the blocks next to the dispenser so only creepers and spiders would spawn. But seriously, the reason why I gathered all of that gunpowder and sand is to craft a bunch of TNT for ancient debris mining. With 2 shulkers full of gunpowder and sand, I was able to craft quite a bit of this stuff, and after grabbing a few fire resistance potions, I was ready to go. If you have the resources to make TNT, I would highly recommend ancient debris mining this way. All you have to do is dig a 2x1 tunnel and then place blocks of TNT every 1 or 2 blocks. Once that's done, all you have to do is grab your flint and steel or flame bow and light it up. It's super fun and probably the most effective way of mining for debris. With the amount of TNT that I had, I was able to get around 27 debris. Not bad. On the way back home, I bumped into a few ghasts who suddenly disappeared when I got close to them. Weird. Now that I had exhausted my urge to blow things up, it was time for another build. This build was going to be a wool shop. There were definitely a lot of other things that I could have built which would have been much more useful, but for some reason, I just really had the urge to build a wool shop. Don't ask me why, I just really wanted to. I actually struggled quite a lot with this build, as I had an idea of what I wanted to make, but didn't really know how to put it into Minecraft. I also tried to work on my detailing skills while working on this build, which is part of the reason why this one took quite a lot longer than some of my previous builds. The finished result definitely wasn't perfect, but overall, I think I did a pretty good job of taking what was in my brain and putting it into the game. We are getting pretty close to the end of these 100 days, but I still have one last big project that I want to work on. This was going to be expensive. Very, very expensive. However, it isn't going to be expensive in what you expect. No, this is going to be expensive in sand. Over 7 shulkers of sand kind of expensive. Surprisingly, it only took 2 days of digging to collect all of the needed materials. It just goes to show how awesome efficiency 5 shovels are. I've mined quite a bit of coal ore in this world so far, and I was going to need all of it to smelt the sand I had gathered. I'm not sure why, but mining all of the coal was extremely satisfying, and I was almost a little bit sad when the last of the ore was gone. After setting the sand up to smelt, I took a few stacks of dirt and built a tower up to Y234. It was finally time to begin arguably my biggest project of the entire series. A glass roof that would cover the entire village. This would allow me to stop worrying about snow getting everywhere and let me begin detailing with the actual snow layers. However, this was going to take a long time. Much longer than the amount of time I have left in this video, but I still wanted to get at least a little progress done on the project. The main bottleneck of the project was my glass smelting speed. The 3 furnaces I had were just not fast enough to match the speed that I could place the glass. This was actually not a completely bad thing, as it gave me time to work on some of the odd jobs around the village, such as the paths and building interiors. Another bonus in disguise was the fact that I was now staying up the entire night to maximize glass smelting time. This helped me to realize that there were still a lot of areas where mobs could spawn in the village, and gave me a new project of spawn-proofing the village roofs. Despite the fact that the glass roof was a very important build, there was no way I was going to end the video by placing glass. No. There was still one more thing that I wanted to do. You may have been wondering why I killed those ghasts a little bit earlier in the video. Yes, I did kill them. They didn't just disappear. Well, you have your answer now. I needed them to craft these end crystals. Once the end crystals were crafted, I headed to the Enderman farm where I repaired my tools and farmed XP until day 299. However, this is going to be the last time you are going to hear me narrate until day 300 because it is montage time. Day 300. Somehow I had managed to survive another 100 days. Although this video may not have been quite as action-packed as the previous ones, it still did have its fair share of danger and close calls. I usually spend the last day of these 100 days challenges relaxing and looking at all of my builds, and this one was no different. Instead of spending the last minutes of the video gazing at the sunset from the highest tower of the village or sitting atop a throne in a grand throne room, I decided to go a little bit more simple and take a visit to the library with my pets. Together, we sat down and read a story, waiting for the time when we would once again be called forth to survive another 100 days. Welcome to the end of the video. If you enjoyed this one and want to see more content like it, consider subscribing. While you're at it, maybe even join my Discord server where I post updates on upcoming videos. With all of that out of the way, this has been GlitchNOut. Goodbye everyone!